My name is Marc Lucenius. I'm the lead pastor here, and I'm glad to welcome everybody to our series. This series, I believe, if we get it right, is going to show us, and I think everybody, that Jesus is the most relevant person in the world today. I believe that our world is either in a burnout or on its way to a burnout. And I believe as his followers, as the followers of Jesus, if we pay attention to who he really is, what he has really done, and what he can teach us, we can be the most well-rested people in the world. All right. Let me see if I can build a little bit of a case for that. I'm not a Swiftie. I didn't go to the Eras Tour. I haven't watched the Eras Tour on Disney Plus either. But I pay attention to people who connect with people. And if I read recently an article by David Brooks reflecting on music and how it's changed, in particular Taylor Swift's music and how it changed. My daughters were tweens when she popped up on the radar screen with all her very hopeful and romantic music. Over the years, and David Brooks noticed this, that the hopefulness and romanticism of her music has changed. And according to his lead, I went and listened to her 2022 album, Midnights, and the themes feel just very much like that, very kind of midnight-ish. It's darker, it's much more cynical, like a woman who's been through an awful lot over the course of 15 years of becoming the most famous woman in the world, right? It's darker, it's heavier, and it follows a much more common theme in our world. A few years ago, we were working on a preaching series called Love Songs, and I started looking for like relevant love song-ish type stuff. Like I grew up in the 80s, and every rock band had its power ballad, right? Not so much today, and according to the research, if you follow the trends of songs in the top 100 from 1965 to 2015, the themes of love drop sharply. The themes of anger, hate, division, they spike, okay? If you follow the news headlines from 2000 to 2019, now news changed radically over that period of time. The headlines in so many ways have gotten much more, have spiked when it comes to division, anger, frustration, disappointment. If you follow the Global Peace Index from 2011 to 2019, riots, strikes, anti-government protests went up by 244%. I mean, think about, like, what if that happened to your 401k? That'd be really, really great. So it's easy to just kind of throw a number away, but like, there's something going on. And all of these numbers are before the pandemic. The world is changing so fast. And if you try to keep up with the world and you try to pay attention to everything and hold on to it, it just moves you so fast. The world is burning up as it's burning out. Everybody is angry. But here's the thing. Everybody's always been angry. Everybody's always been angry. We just don't have enough time and space to manage it like we used to. We have the same heart. We have the same heart. As we look in the days of Jesus, you see the same issues. And Jesus knows the heart. He knows your heart. He has what the world needs. And I believe that we can learn from him, even in this normal, that is an awful normal, how to be the most well-rested people in the world. So we're going to read from a passage of Scripture, a foundational passage of Scripture on rest. And Jesus is dealing with something known as the Sabbath. if for most of us, what we know about the Sabbath is that we don't get to have Chick-fil-A on Sundays, all right? Or something other, sort of like something grandmother said you couldn't do something because of the Sabbath, right? It is that on the seventh day, the people of God get to celebrate a day of rest. In Jesus' time, people thought if we could just celebrate the Sabbath right, God would bless us right. And so they filled it with rules. They jacked the whole thing up. And Jesus was, he was frustrated with that. Let me read. I'm reading from the Gospel of Marc. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" He answered, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar, the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions." Then he said to them, "The Sabbath was not made for man. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." Another time, Jesus went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stand up in front of everyone." Jesus asked them, "Which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill?" But they remained silent. He looked around at them in anger and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts. He said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. Then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. So you received a notebook when you got here. We're going to talk about some things that are so out of our cultural norm that I'm going to have to make a pretty decent biblical case. And I'm going to have to do a little bit more teaching. And so I want this to be more of a teaching series. And I want it to be a conversation because it's going to feel different. It's going to provoke a variety of questions. You're going to be like, how am I supposed to? Yes, there's going to be a lot of that. I want you to write down some of the things that make sense to you. And feel free to use it to write down recipes or whatever you can, the to-do list you can't get out of your head right now. Whatever you need to do, use it, and maybe it'll help us. We are doing the series is called Rest Assured, where we're talking about how Jesus brings rest to a burn-out culture. How Jesus can give us rest in our burned-up hearts. And I do not come here coming as the authority, the most well-rested person in the world. I actually come as somebody who's struggled with this for a long time. In the recovery world, I admit myself as a recovering workaholic, and true facts. Just a few weeks ago, my longtime accountability partner and best friend, Eric, was here, and he was talking to Rachel about this series and asked Rachel if she's going to be teaching as part of the series, and she said, "No, Mark's doing all of it." And he said, "Well, he certainly has plenty of material." And what he was talking about was not all my content, but what he was talking about is the 20 years of hearing me cry and whine and struggle and talk about the same things over and over and over again, because this has been a real thing in my life. And I'll bring some of those things, but it's not necessarily about me. I think this is something that's matched up with our culture. It's matched up with our lives. And I don't think I'm that different. I think there's a lot of us that have found that life feels most normal when our RPMs are in the yellow. If you're not a car person, all right, you've got two dials you're looking at, right? There's the speed, which you pay attention to most of the time, and then there's the other thing you don't pay attention to, and it's like a little dial that says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Somewhere after 5, there's a little the color gets yellow, and then somewhere after 6, it gets red, right? That's in the 5,000 RPMs. If you run your car that way, you're in danger of destroying it. If you put it into the red for very long, you are putting damage in it. I believe our world, and I have found my normal, is way too close to that yellow, which means that if one thing goes wrong, all of a sudden, boom, and all of a sudden I'm doing damage to myself and others. I have this quote on the whiteboard at the office, and I just wrote it there for me. It's a quote by Warren Buffett that says, "You cannot have a baby in 1 month by getting 9 women pregnant." Okay? Just think about it. Think about it, all right? It's my lifelong resistance to that whole concept of process, right? I think God smiles particularly when he thinks of process and me. Anyway, enough disclaimers. Let's just jump into the first basic question of the whole thing. What is the Sabbath? Okay, the Sabbath is a biblical teaching. It's the 4th commandment. It's the 4th commandment of God that for 24 hours the people of God are to rest. And the commandments were given in 2 times, and in each of those times a different basis was given as to why we should celebrate the Sabbath. Moses gave the 10 commandments at the very beginning of their time in the wilderness and at the very end. In the very beginning, he says, here's why you're going to celebrate the Sabbath. Because God celebrated the Sabbath. He created the world in 6 days, and on the 7th day, he rested. We're made in the image of God. We do what he does, and he commands it. First time they experience it is when they were given manna. And they were able to collect it for 6 days. On the 6th day, they were supposed to collect double so they could rest on the 7th day. Now, this might not seem that significant, but in an agrarian society, this feels like economic suicide, right? Because you get as much harvest as seed you put in the ground. You put as much seed in the ground as land you can plow. And if you take out 1/7 of your work time, you would think you're going to get 1/7 less of a harvest. And when you need that harvest to get you from October maybe to July to where you can harvest again, you don't know if you're going to have enough food. That's a big, big deal. And the idea of the Sabbath is it was now what I would say is why it was a big trust thing is, other societies, the rich people, they got to take days off. They got to take days off, and they got to go to the worship. They got to go to worship. They got to go to whatever they would do. But it was the poor. You would never give the poor a day off. You would never give the working class a day off. In Israel, everybody gets a day off. And the wealthy and the powerful needed to make sure that the poor also got that day off. It was a day off for everyone, where they trusted God with the harvest. They trusted God to stay in control of all things. They trusted God to keep their enemies at bay. They trusted God with their lives. All right, so the first basis was based upon how God created the world. It was written in Exodus. The second basis is right before they're going into the promised land. Now, this is the second generation. They didn't live in Egypt. They didn't live in Egypt. They were born while in the 40 years of the wilderness, and they're going to go into the promised land, and they're going to take over this new land. And God says, oh, yeah, remember the 10 commandments and the Sabbath? I really, really meant it. When you go in there, you're going to want to get these farms set up. You're going to want to get your home set up. You're going to want to rebuild these cities. You're going to want to do all these things. And all these things, you're going to move into your new home, and you're going to paint the walls. Look, trust me, I still want you to rest 1 day a week. I want you to rest 1 day a week because, and the basis in this time is why? Because you were slaves in Egypt. You're not slaves anymore. The Sabbath was not, the first time he said the Sabbath, this is just good for you. It's good for the world, and it's good for everybody, right? We're not going to, Israel isn't going to just be for the middle class and upper class people. Israel is going to be a good thing for everybody. The second time he says it's about your identity. You're not going to be slaves. If you can't stop working, you become a slave to that work. And you are not a slave. The people of Israel, no one in Israel lives like a slave. Even the immigrants and the indentured servants, they get a day off as well. Nobody lives like a slave. You are not slaves. You are sons. You are children. You are my special people. You are different than the rest of the world. The rest of the world can run after the harvest and run after all those things. You are different. You don't need to. Why? Because I'm going to be the one that provides for you. You don't have to panic and be fearful. God is going to be the provider. Everybody else, they're not going to be able to trust this. You can trust that I will provide for you. You could shut it down and let the creator of the universe stay in control of things. You could practice that. It's deep to the identity. And that's why I believe one of the central things for followers of Christ, particularly in our world that's constantly busy, constantly racing around, if we are going to have a helpful witness, we're going to have to trust God and live lives that are well rested. Well rested is the fundamental difference between the people of God and the nations around them. Why? Because they could take a day off once a week. The nations around them must have looked at them and said, "What is wrong with you? That is so weird." There's, as we talk about this, we're going to talk about Sabbath in 4 ways. There's 4 aspects to the Sabbath. It's ceasing. It means you stop. And for a lot of us, if we're going to get well rested, we're just going to have to stop some things. There's rest. It means the activities that we participate in is going to be restorative, right? For some people, an activity might be restorative. To other person, it might be a burden, right? Third, it's feasting. It's celebrating all that we have, and it's embracing. It's accepting the life that we have and embracing the call that God has on our lives. We're going to come back to that in weeks to come. But as you think of it, what I don't want you to think is like, okay, that's the Sabbath. I just need to sit around and read the Bible all day. No, there's a lot of aspects to it. All right. Now, the Pharisees, the opponents of Jesus in this passage, I think they started out wanting this for people. I think their heart was that, look, the people need to rest. People need to be restored. And so, but in their minds, like, God isn't clear enough. And so let's layer on a whole bunch of rules. And what ended up happening is their culture war hearts activated, and they started creating all sorts of rules on top of it, whereby they could then cancel people for their ideological drift from Sabbath keeping according to their rules. You picking up what I'm laying down there? You see the followers of Jesus. They're just walking through the fields. You know, they said you can only walk this far on the Sabbath, otherwise it becomes work, right? And so they're going on a short walk within the rules of the day. But while they're walking along, they pull some heads of grain. And I guess in those days you could pull off a head of grain and do something with it and come up with a snack. It sounds awful to me, but I guess if you don't have Pop Smart back then, you just eat wheat. I don't know what. Anyway, they're doing that, and they're getting a snack. And the Pharisees, they freak out. They're like, they're harvesting. And she's like, what's wrong with you? All right, do you remember David? David was on the run from Saul, and he goes to the high priest. He lies to the high priest. Jesus leaves that out, but he lies to the high priest, and the high priest gives him some bread, some sacred bread that the only priests were supposed to eat. And Jesus said, yes, you think there's certain things that are sacred, but come on. The sacred things are supposed to serve ordinary life. The sacred things are supposed to serve the purposes of God. If you turn sacred things into feeding your insecure issues or whatever you're trying to do, you twist things into something else. He says, look, you've taken the gift of God for rest and made it a whole bunch of work. It's an entire burden. He's like, don't you realize what you've done? Later, he brings this guy in front of them, and he wants to heal them, and they're going to be like, if you heal them, that's working. And it says he's angry with them, and he's distressed with them, because the people of God are desperate. These people are desperate for some rest, but the pastors and the spiritual leaders, all they do is give them more work. More work. The one gift that God has given the people, they've turned into this rule-keeping, cancel culture disaster. It says he was distressed and he's angry. Everybody wants rest now. Everybody wanted rest then. We could be hard on the Pharisees, but you want to know how many times in my feed I get this message? Stop scrolling. Do this for 15 minutes every day, and then you'll have rock hard abs. You'll know every single leadership book ever, right? The amount of things that people want me to do for 15 minutes every day. If I did every single thing that people wanted me to do for 15 minutes every day, I wouldn't start my day until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The amount of rules that are out there for being a good suburban person is ridiculous. And we get this messaging all the time, and it's constantly exhausting us. The wellness industry alone, you know how big it is? It's $5.6 trillion. The wellness industry could solve our national debt in about 6 years. You realize that? And is it working? And is it working for everybody, right? Because only a certain, maybe the top 20, 30% of our culture actually has the funds to invest in the wellness industry. Does that sound like rest? Does that sound like rest for everybody? Man's not made for all these rules. Jesus says to the Pharisees, and he's kind of done with them. Like, all right, let's just blow this thing up and let them know exactly what's going on here. He says to them, look, man is not made for this Sabbath. Man's not made for these rules. God made man and then gave them the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for man. And if you're not getting me, Jesus says, oh, by the way, I'm Lord of the Sabbath. At that point, they're starting to freak out. This is like, you mean you get, yeah. He's like, I am the one that gives rest. I am the one that gives rest. Now, what I'm saying to you here is there's nothing wrong with the wellness industry. I read books. I want to eat healthier. I've got nickels and dimes going to different exercise things all the time, right? So I'm not against the wellness industry, but what Jesus is saying is that if you want rest, you're going to need to come to him. And what he's saying to the Pharisees is like, if you want to get the Sabbath right, you listen to me and then build it around me, because he says, I'm the one who has come to give rest. The wellness things and all these things, they might help, and they might give some tactical tips as to make this thing better or that thing better. But they don't ultimately do what Jesus does and address the work underneath the work. I got this term from Tim Keller. The work underneath the work is all the energy that's going on underneath the workaholism. All the energy that's going on underneath, all the activity, all of the busyness, all of the neediness, all of the running around. It's the question that we're constantly asking. Do I look good? Does my house look good enough? Is my career right? Why haven't I gotten to a certain place in my life that I thought I was going to get by now? Why am I being moved out of the center? Is my 401k good enough, right? Do I look good enough? Why did I gain weight? How are my kids doing? Why aren't they like this? Why isn't my life like this? What about that hobby? Why can't I put more time into that hobby? Do I look good? What about the plan for my life? I thought I was going to do this and then this and then this and then this. These are the questions that our mind is constantly working. It's the work underneath the work. And because we don't have those questions addressed, anytime there's a little open spot on our calendar, we have to fill it. Why? Because the work underneath the work isn't done. And we go to these things to get a little bit of rest, right? Because let me just check the 401k. If that's going in the right direction, I know I'll be okay. Or we make sure that our kids are going in the right direction, because if then they're okay, then we could be okay. We attend to our career because if that is going in the right direction, then I know I'll be okay. But none of those things can give what we need to give. None of those questions can really address the work underneath the work. My favorite definition of the Sabbath, and I'll give you some more as we go along, but Tim Keller says it most simply. He says, the Sabbath is enjoying the work that has been done. For me, stopping and resting is always like, well, have I done enough? Have I done enough? And it's hard because this thing, all these things aren't done. And in ministry, there's always one more phone call. There's always one more email. There's always one more thing you can do. When you're a student, you can always read a little bit more. There's always one more thing you can do. How do you know you can stop? Jesus addresses the work underneath the work on the cross when he says, "It is finished." Because at the cross, he addressed our sense of justification. He addressed whether we belong or not. You may or may not belong with this person, this community, that community. Your neighbors might have parties and you may or may not be invited to them. But fundamentally, you belong with the family of God. You belong in the kingdom. You might not have an office in the C-suite, right? You might not have a C in front of your title, right? But you belong in the throne room of God, and you have access to the ultimate authority in this world. You have immediate access to all of the power in this world. It addresses the issues of our provision. Our 401k is not going to provide for us at the end of our life. God is going to provide for us. That 401k can't we can't trust that 401k will be there. We cannot trust that Social Security will be there. We can trust that God will be there. When we know that these things have been fully and finally addressed, then we can rest. Imagine a boss who has an employee who's always tired and is always working and never takes a day off. And the boss says, "Hey, why don't you take off?" No. But the employee's always tired, always working, always moody, always stressed. And the boss continues to say, "Take a day off." Nope. I'm giving you a day off. Nope. I'm giving you a day off. Nope. And that person is a total mess and totally stressed, living at the edge all the time. It might be what heaven feels like when it looks down at the church. Stressed, tired, burdened, running around, worrying about their kids, worrying about this, worrying about that. How about you take a day off? Nope. How about you? No. What about this? But there's this opportunity. I can't let my kids not have this opportunity. What about this thing? My yard, my house, my garage, my basement, this room, these friends, these people. You might be saying, "Okay, Mark, I'm slightly interested. I'm slightly interested in what you're saying. but you don't know my life. I began this journey. I really began to look in this when my kids, I had 3 kids under the age of 6. We had a new house that we had just moved into that needed to be turned over entirely. And I had a ministry that was growing rapidly. And I realized that I wasn't going to make it. I wasn't going to make it unless I started thinking differently about my life. Okay? So I want to step back and see if I can summarize. If we're going to have rest, Jesus says, come to me. Wellness industry, sure. That could be, sure, whatever. You can use that. Use it. But fundamentally, if we want to rest, we need to come to the one who has addressed the work underneath the work. Jesus says to you and me, he says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you'll find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So really quickly, he says, if you're tired, come to him. First thing. Secondly, if you want to live well rested, you're going to need to take his yoke upon you. If you drive through Lancaster County, particularly this time of year, it's kind of a cool thing. It's alarming to my kids and my family when I do this, but I like to look at the farms as I drive through those roads, right? Because I particularly like it when I can see somebody plowing the fields. And they're typically plowing the fields, not with their tractors, right, because they don't do that sort of thing. So they'll have 6, 8, sometimes 12 oxes or mules or horses pulling these plows. And it's really cool to look. Well, the way those plows work is they have something called the yoke. And the yoke is the bar that goes across the chest of the beast, so to speak, the beast pulling the plow. And that yoke is what sets the direction. It brings them together. In ancient times, the rabbi's teaching was the yoke he gave to his followers. And what Jesus is saying is that you need to lay aside the other yokes that are determining your pace and your pattern and direction of your life. And you're going to need to take his yoke. And he says, I promise you, my yoke is way lighter, way easier, and my burden is way lighter than everybody else out there. That dude who says, if you do this for 15 minutes every day, yeah, whatever, right? All those things that say, look, if you do this, if then. And Jesus says, look, all those folks, all they can do is burden you because they don't know me. If you fundamentally want rest and live a well-rested life, he didn't say, just come to me. He says, learn from me. Learn his life. Learn the secret of his easy yoke. So I'm not going to give you that today. All right? Because I think that this is so counterculture and so different that I think we need to tease this thing out over a few weeks. And I think this needs to be sorted out in conversation in our small groups, in our friendships, in the coffee shops that we hang out together. We need to talk about what does rest look like for me and you. I will give you 4 things of application and talk about 3 of them, okay? First one is this. It really is a day. It's a 24-hour thing, all right? God asks you to set a day aside for a Sabbath. I think for most Americans, it's going to look like Saturday night to Sunday night, right? For those in ministry, it looks different depending on the different church you're a part of, but it does mean setting 24 hours aside. Abraham Heschel wrote a classic book on the Sabbath, and what he described it, he says it's like a cathedral in time, right? When you go into a classic cathedral, it's this holy space where you're supposed to be taken up with the holiness of God and the sort of the protection of being in that space and the wonder that it creates. And in a sense that you're stepping out of a profane world into a sacred space, right? Well, Abraham Heschel would say to you, the Sabbath is like a cathedral in time. It's a day where you can step into that day and let God be in control of the universe and just let it go. Leave your work at the door. Leave your problems at the door. Leave the issues and trust God with the bigger pictures of life. You can rest. You can cease. You can feast. You can brace. You can enjoy Practice living in eternity for 24 hours and trust that God has control of your provision, that God has control of your problems, that God has control of this, that, the other. You can simply enjoy life, okay? 24 hours. See if you can pull it off between now and next Sunday. All right. Secondly, it's an attitude. And for me, this is where it hit me. I experienced what most people would call burnout about 10 years into sort of our marriage and ministry life. And it really didn't have anything to do with any of those things. It had to do with the way I was responding to things. And yes, there was pressures, there was children, there was growing things, and we weren't making a ton of money or anything like that. And so there's just a lot of things. But it wasn't about the things. It was about what I was saying inside of my heart. What was going on that was producing the burnout wasn't the circumstances. It was how I was responding to them. My heart continued to have messages of self-pity, bitterness, and resentment. And all of those little messages when I warmed my hands at my frustrations of the circumstances or what this person did or how hard this thing was, all of these things were these messages I kept sending my soul of self-deception. My life would be better if this person, that thing, if I got to this. Everything was about needing the circumstances to change so that I could be okay. The Sabbath comes to us and says, God has done everything you need for a well-rested life. His divine power, 1 Peter 1:3 says, His divine power has given us everything we need for life and godliness. If I'm not well-rested, that's a me thing. If I'm really, really busy, it's not about the circumstances. It's a me thing. And when it came to the stress and when it came to the circumstances, if I'm getting overwhelmed with it, it's at the end of the day, my attitude was like, I should be the most well-rested person. I'm a pastor. I should know better. And if I'm not well-rested, it's not on my kids. It's not on my wife. It's not on the church. It's not on the Republicans or the Democrats. It's not on any of these things. It's on me. God has given me rest. And God has given us rest. It's a day. It's an attitude. It's a rhythm. I don't have time to talk about that. All right. And finally, the fourth thing, it's a journey, right? The last thing Jesus wants us to do is to get really fired up about the Sabbath, go home, and make a whole bunch of rules as to what we're not going to do for 24 hours. Okay? The truth of the matter is, unless you really know what's restorative, unless you've thought about what's truly restorative in your life, spiritually, emotionally, physically, you're probably not going to get it right in the first setting. We just need to start experimenting and thinking about what does it mean to receive the gift of rest that God gives us? How do we receive that gift? How do we live as if we've received that gift well? If a dad gave his kids a present for Christmas and then made a whole bunch of rules as to why the kids can never enjoy it, it wouldn't make sense, right? What does a dad want his kids to do with the gift of Christmas? Enjoy the gift. We need to start a conversation and think to ourselves, what does it look like for us to live well rested? I want to share just one little story that might help, that might resonate with where you are right now. It was May 1853. Phoebe and her husband, Holden Judson, joined a covered wagon train near Kansas City, hoping to reach the Washington Territory by mid-October. So that's like Washington State. All right, so Kansas City, middle of the country, Washington State, far northwest. This was a distance of more than 2,000 miles over the rough Oregon Trail. Like all wagon trains, they elected a captain, and his word was the law. And they chose Reverend Gustavus Hines, only to be surprised one Saturday night when he announced the train would never travel on Sundays. Phoebe was shocked. They had a half a continent to cross at oxen pace, which is 15 to 20 miles per day on a good trail. With mountain passes and innumerable river crossings ahead of them, she sat in her wagon and just fumed. One family deserted the train and joined another. On their first Sunday, while they stood still, one train after another passed them by. They started out again on Monday, only to reach their first river cross on Tuesday evening, and a long line of wagons stretched out ahead of them, waiting for the single ferry to carry them across. You thought we invented traffic, right? And so they had, I guess this is their version of I-95 going to Baltimore. Anyway, they waited 3 days to get across the river. On Saturday, they resumed the journey, only to be told they would still rest the whole next day. Phoebe was livid. This made absolutely no sense to her. Then a few weeks later, she began to see scores of dead oxen, mules, and horses along the trail. They had been driven so relentlessly, they had collapsed and died. She grudgingly admitted that perhaps the animals needed a day of rest. A few weeks later, she ruefully admitted that maybe the men needed it too, since they walked most of the time. Then she slowly began to notice that as they worshiped, ate, rested, and even played together on Sundays, it had a remarkably beneficial effect on people's spirits. There was less grumbling, more cooperation. She even noticed that they seemed to make better time the other 6 days. Finally, what totally sold her on the value of the Sabbath happened one Sunday evening. The family that had deserted them came limping into the campsite, humbly asking to rejoin them. She had assumed that they were at least a week ahead. In fact, they had fallen behind. Their own wagon train had broken down. Of course, they welcomed them back. And so it happened that they reached their destination in plenty of time, as friends. And out of the 50 head of cattle with which they began, only 2 were lost. I like that last little detail because I guess it's not entirely up and to the right, at least for all the cattle. Anyway, this is a conversation, and my heart for us today as a church is that we could believe that we could live well rested. We could live with the fruit of the Spirit of love and joy and peace, and that can be normal. And out of that rest, we could serve and give ourselves with gratitude to the people and the world around us. Let's pray.